Where am I? Right here.
The doctor don't want.
The doctor don't want I should be left without anybody to do for me.
She said in her flat whine. He had supposed her to be asleep, and the sound of her voice had startled him, though she was given to abrupt explosions of speech after long intervals of secretive silence. He turned and looked at her, where she lay indistinctly outlined under the dark calico quilt, her high-boned face taking a grayish tinge from the whiteness of the pillow. Nobody to do for you? He repeated.
If you say you can afford a hired girl when Maddie goes...
Frome turned away and taking up his razor stooped to catch the reflection of his stretched cheek in the blotched looking glass above the washstand. Why on earth would Maddie go?
Well, when she gets married, I mean.
His wife's drawl came from behind him.
Oh,
wait, that's me. Oh, she'd never leave us as long as you needed her, he returned, scraping hard at his chin.
I wouldn't ever have said that I stood in the way of a poor girl like Maddie marrying a smart fellow like Dennis Eady.
Zena answered in a tone of plaintive self-effacement. Ethan, glaring at his face in the glass, threw his head back to draw the razor from her ear to chin. His hand was steady, but the attitude was an excuse for not making an immediate reply.
And the doctor don't want I should be left without anybody.
Zena continued. He
wanted I should speak to you about a girl he's heard about that might come.
Ethan laid down the razor and straightened himself with a laugh. Dennis Eady. If that's all, I guess there's no such hurry to look around for a girl.
Well, I'd like to talk to you about it,
said Zena obstinately. He was getting into his clothes in fumbling haste. All right, but I haven't got the time now. I'm as late as it is. He returned, holding his old silver turnip watch to the candle. Zena, apparently accepting this as final, lay watching him in silence while he pulled his suspenders over his shoulders and jerked his arms into his coat. But as he went toward the door, she said, suddenly and incisively,
I guess you're always late. Now you have shaved every morning.
Hold on. Look what she just said. I guess you're always late now that you shave every morning. She's picking up on what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So here's the thing. You have to start playing. You have to start deciding for yourself. You know, this is Ethan's version, right? But who wouldn't be upset with her husband cheating with her own cousin or wanting to cheat? That thrust had frightened him more than any vague insinuations about Dennis Eady. It was a fact that since Maddie Silver's coming, he had taken to shaving every day. But his wife always seemed to be asleep when he left her side in the winter darkness, and he had stupidly assumed that she would not notice any change in his appearance. Once or twice in the past, he had been faintly disquieted by Zenobia's way of letting things happen without seeming to remark them. And then, weeks afterward, in a casual phrase, revealing that she had all along taken her notes and drawn her inferences. Zena herself, from an oppressive reality, had faded into an insubstantial shade. All his life was lived in the sight and sound of Maddie Silver, and he could no longer conceive of its being otherwise. But now, as he stood outside the church and saw Maddie spinning down the floor with Dennis Eady, a throng of disregarded hints and menaces wove their cloud above his brain. As the dancers poured out of the hall, Frome, drawing back behind the projecting storm door, watched the segregation of the grotesquely muffled groups, in which a moving lantern rained now and then lit up a face flushed with food and dancing. The villagers being afoot were the first to climb the slope of the main street, while the country neighbors packed themselves more slowly into the sleighs under the shed. So, now you have some people. So Maddie Silver's coming out of that dance. So we'll sit here, and then she's gonna get some invitations. There you go. She's gonna get some invitations to revel after the dance. Okay. Ain't you riding, Maddie? A woman's voice called back from the throng about the shed, and Ethan's heart gave a jump. From where he stood, he could not see the persons coming out of the hall till they had advanced a few steps beyond the wooden sides of the storm door. But through its cracks, he heard a clear voice answer,
"Mercy, no, not on such a night."
She was there, then, close to him, only a thin board between. In another moment, she would step forth into the night, and his eyes, accustomed to the obscurity, would discern her as clearly as though she stood in daylight. A wave of shyness pulled him back into the dark angle of the wall, and he stood there in silence instead of making his presence known to her. It had been one of the wonders of their intercourse that from the first she, the quicker, finer, more expressive, instead of crushing him by the contrast, had given him something of her own ease and freedom. But now he felt as heavy and loutish as in his student's days, when he had tried to jolly the Worcester girls at a picnic. He hung back and came out alone and paused within a few yards of him. She was almost the last to leave the hall, and he stood looking uncertainly about her, as if wondering why he did not show himself. Then a man's figure approached, coming so close to her that under their formless wrappings, they seemed to merge in one dim outline.
Gentleman friend
Oh,
gone
that's
to
me.
control.
Now I'm another gentleman. I'm Dennis Eady. I'll put a hood on for it. And become more suave. Are we ready? Gentleman friend gone back on you? Say, Matt, that's tough. No, I wouldn't be mean enough to tell the other girls. I ain't as low down as that. How Frome hated his cheap banter. But looky here. Ain't it lucky I got the old man's cutter down there waiting for us? Frome heard the girl's voice, gaily incredulous.
What on earth's your father's cutter doing down there?
Why, waiting for me to take a ride. I got the roan coal too. I kind of knew I'd want to take a ride tonight. Edie, in his triumph, tried to put a sentimental note into his bragging voice. The girl seemed to waver, and Frome saw her twirl the end of her scarf irresolutely about her fingers. Not for the world would he have made a sign to her, though it seemed to him that his life hung on her next gesture. Hold on a minute while I unhitch the colt, Dennis called to her, springing toward the shed. She stood perfectly still, looking at him in an attitude of tranquil expectancy, torturing to the hidden watcher. Frome noticed that she no longer turned her head from side to side, as though peering through the night for another figure. She let Dennis Eady lead out the horse, climb into the cutter, and fling back to the bearskin to make room for her to sit at his side. Then, with a swift motion of flight, she turned about and darted up the slope toward the front of the church.
Goodbye. Hope you'll have a lovely ride.
She called back to him over her shoulder. Dennis laughed and gave the horse a cut and brought him quickly abreast of her retreating figure. Come along. Get in quick. It's as slippery as thunder on this turn, he cried, leaning over to reach out a hand to her. She laughed back at him.
Good night. I'm not getting in.
By this time, they had passed beyond Frome's earshot, and he could only follow the shadowy pantomime of their silhouettes as they continued to move along the crest of the slope above him. He saw Edie, after a moment, jump from the cutter and go toward the girl and the reins over one arm. The other he tried to slip through hers, but she eluded him nimbly, and Frome's heart, which had swung out over a black void, trembled back to safety. A moment later, he heard the jingle of the departing sleigh bells and discerned a figure advance alone toward the empty expanse of snow before the church. In the black shade of the Varnum spruces, he caught up with her, and she turned with a quick,
Oh.
Think I'd forgotten about you, Matt? He asked with a sheepish glee. She answered seriously.
I thought maybe you couldn't come back for me.
Couldn't? What on earth could stop me?
I knew Zena wasn't feeling any too good today.
Oh, she's in bed long ago. He paused, a question struggling in him. Then you meant to walk home all alone?
Oh, I ain't afraid.
She laughed. They stood together in the gloom of the spruces, an empty world glimmering about them, wide and gray under the stars. He brought his question out. If you thought I hadn't come, why didn't you ride back with Dennis Eady?
Why? Where were you? How did you know? I never saw you.
Her wonder and his laughter ran together like spring rails in a thaw. Ethan had the sense of having done something arch and ingenious. To prolong the effect, he groped for a dazzling phrase, something to say, and brought out, in a growl of rapture, "Come along." He slipped an arm through hers as Edie had done, and fancied it was faintly pressed against her side, but neither of them moved. It was so dark under the spruces that he could barely see the shape of her head beside his scarf. He longed to stoop his cheek and rub it against her scarf. He would have liked to stand there with her all night in the blackness. She moved forward a step or two, and then paused again above the dip of the Corbury Road and its icy slope. Scored by innumerable runners, looked like a mirror scratched by travelers at an inn.
There was a whole lot of them coasting before the moon set.
She said, "Would you like to come in and coast with them some night?" he asked.
Oh, would you, Ethan? It would be lovely.
"We'll come tomorrow if there's a moon." She lingered, pressing closer to his side.
Ned Hale and Ruth Varnum came just as near running into the big elm at the bottom. We were all sure they were killed.
Her shiver ran down his arm.
Wouldn't it have been too awful? They're so happy.
"Oh, Ned ain't much at steering. I guess I can take you down all right," he said disdainfully. He was aware that he was talking big, like Dennis Eady, but his reaction of joy had unsteadied him, and the inflection with which she had said of the engaged couple
They're so happy.
made the words sound as if she had been thinking of herself and him.
The elm is dangerous, though. It ought to be cut down.
She insisted. "Would you be afraid of it with me?"
I told you I ain't the kind to be afraid.
She tossed back almost indifferently, and suddenly she began to walk on with a rapid step. These alterations of mood were the despair and joy of Ethan Frome. The motions of her mind were as incalculable as the flit of a bird in the branches. The fact that he had no right to show his feelings and thus provoke the expression of hers made him attach a fantastic importance to every change in her look and tone. So you guys understand exactly what he's talking about. Is those moments when you really have a crush on somebody, and 1 second they send you something, you're like, yes, like me. And the next second they ignore you, they're like, oh, but they don't. Because Ethan can't profess his love and can't say anything. Every change in her mood registers like an earthquake for him. Now he thought she understood him and feared. Now he was sure she did not, and despaired. Tonight, the pressure of accumulated misgivings sent the scale drooping toward despair, and her indifference was the more chilling after the flush of joy into which she had plunged him by dismissing Dennis Eady. He mounted Schoolhouse Hill at her side and walked on in silence till they reached the lane leading to the sawmill. Then the need of some definite assurance grew too strong for him. "You'd have found me right off if you hadn't gone back to have that last reel with Dennis," he brought out awkwardly. He could not pronounce the name without a stiffening of the muscles of his throat.
Why, Ethan, how could I tell you were there?
"I suppose what folks say is true," he jerked out at her instead of answering. She stopped short, and he felt in the darkness that her face was lifted quickly to his.
Why? What do folks say?
"It's natural enough you should be leaving us," he floundered on, following his thought.
Is that what they say?
She mocked back at him. Then, with a sudden drop of her sweet treble,
You mean that Zena ain't suited with me anymore?
she faltered. Their arms had slipped apart, and they stood motionless, each seeking to distinguish the other's face.
I know I ain't lying, ain't anything like as smart as I ought to be.
She went on, while they vainly struggled for expression.
There's lots of things a hired girl could do that come awkward to me still, and I haven't gotten much strength in my arms, but if she'd only tell me I'd try. You know she hardly ever says anything, and sometimes I can see she ain't suited, and yet I don't know why.
She turned on him with a sudden flash of indignation.
You ought to tell me, Ethan Frome. You ought to. Unless you want me to go too.
Unless he wanted her to go too? The cry was balm to his raw wound. The iron heavens seemed to melt and rain down sweetness, and he struggled for the all-expressive word. And again, his arm in hers found only a deep, "Come along." They walked on in silence through the blackness of the hemlock-shaded lane where Ethan's sawmill gloomed through the night and out again into the comparative clearness of the fields. On the farther side of the hemlock belt, the open country rolled away before them, gray and lonely under the stars. Sometimes their way led them under the shade of an overhanging bank or through the thin obscurity of a clump of leafless trees. Here and there a farmhouse stood far back among the fields, mute and cold as a gravestone. The night was so still that they had heard the frozen snow crackle under their feet. The crash of a loaded branch falling far off in the woods reverberated like a musket shot. And once a fox barked, and Maddie shrank closer to Ethan and quickened her steps. At length they sighted the group of larches at Ethan's gate, and as they drew near it, the sense that the walk was over brought back his words. "Then you don't want to leave us, Matt?" He had to stoop his head to catch her stifled whisper.
Where'd I go, if I did?
The answer sent a pang through him, but the tone suffused him with joy. He forgot what else he had meant to say and pressed her against him so closely that he seemed to feel her warmth in his veins. "You ain't crying, are you, Matt?"
No, of course I'm not.
She quavered. They turned in at the gate and passed under the shaded knoll to where, enclosed in a low fence, the Frome gravestone slanted at crazy angles through the snow. Ethan looked at them curiously. For years, that quiet company had mocked his restlessness, his desire for change and freedom. "We never got away. How should you?" seemed to be written on every headstone. And whenever he went in or out of the gate, he thought with a shiver, "I shall just go on living here till I join them." But now all desire for change had vanished, and the sight of the little enclosure gave him a warm sense of continuance and stability. "I guess we'll never let you go, Matt," he whispered, as though even the dead lovers once must conspire with him to keep her. And brushing by the graves, he thought, "We'll always go on living here together, and someday she'll lie there beside me." Stop, pause. This man's greatest hope is solely that we will live in this weird little home till the day we die. And that will be it. Ethan doesn't ever have the hope and desire to reach out to actually say the words to Maddie. He just thinks this will be good enough. This will be his life. It's better than what it was with Xena. So they'll just die this way. He's a man unable to act. Remember, actions define our lives. He let the vision possess him as they climbed the hill to the house. He was never so happy with her as when he abandoned himself to these dreams. Halfway up the slope, Maddie stumbled against some unseen obstruction and clutched his sleeve to steady herself. The wave of warmth that went through him was like the prolongation of his vision. For the first time, he stole his arm about her, and she did not resist. They walked on as if they were floating on a summer stream. Xena always went to bed as soon as she had had her supper, and the shutterless windows of the house were dark. A dead cucumber vine dangled from the porch like the crepe streamer tied to the door for a death. And then thought flashed through Ethan's brain. If it was there for Xena, then he had distinct sight of his wife. lying in her bedroom asleep, her mouth slightly open, her false teeth in a tumbler by the bed. They walked around back to the house between the rigid gooseberry bushes. It was Zena's habit when they came back late from the village to leave the key of the kitchen door under the mat. Ethan stood before the door, his head heavy with dreams, his arms still about Maddie. "Matt," he began, not knowing what he meant to say. She slipped out of his hold without speaking, and he stooped down and felt for the key. "It's not there," he said, straightening himself with a start. They strained their eyes at each other through the icy darkness. Such a thing had never happened before.
Maybe she's forgotten it?
Maddie said in a tremulous whisper, but both of them knew that it was not like Zena to forget.
It must have fallen off into the snow.
Maddie continued, after a pause during which they had stood intently listening. It must have just been pushed off then, he rejoined in the same tone. Another wild thought tore through him. What if tramps had been there? What if? Another ellipsis, so what is he thinking? What if somebody broke in? What if they killed her? What if I'm free from this marriage and I don't actually have to do anything? What if? Again, he listened, fancying he heard a distant sound in the house. Then he felt in his pocket for a match and kneeling down passed its light slowly over the rough edges of snow before the doorstep. He was still kneeling when his eyes, on a level with the lower panel of the door, caught a faint ray beneath it. Who could be stirring in that silent house? He heard a step on the stairs, and again for an instant the thought of tramps tore through him. Then the door opened, and he saw his wife. Against the dark background of the kitchen, she stood up, tall and angular, one hand drawing a quilted counterpane to her flat breast, while the other held a lamp. The light on a level with her chin drew out of the darkness, her puckered throat and the projecting wrist of the hand that clutched the quilt, and deepened fantastically the hollows and prominences of her high-boned face under its ring of crimping pins. To Ethan, still in the rosy haze of his hour with Maddie, the sight came with the intense precision of the last dream before waking. He felt as if he had never before known what his wife looked like. She drew aside without speaking, and Maddie and Ethan passed into the kitchen, which had deadly chill of a vault after the dry cold of the night. "Guess you forgot about us, Zena," Ethan joked, stamping the snow from his boots. Get over here, Zena.
Let me see if we're in.
Yeah, I can see if we're in.
Okay, you are right now where you stand.
Okay. So I've just come through from my long walk with Maddie. You, who never stayed up. The key is missing. Did she do this by accident? Did Zena forget? Or is Zena making a point? Come on in here, Zena.
I should have been home. No, I just felt so mean I couldn't sleep.
I just felt so mean I couldn't sleep. Maddie came forward, unwinding her wraps, the color of the cherry scarf in her fresh lips and cheeks.
I'm so sorry, Zena. Isn't there anything I can do?
Let's come this way.
Yeah, good. That's you.
Oh, no, there's nothing.
Zena turned away from her.
You might have shook off that snow outside,
She said to her husband. She walked out of the kitchen ahead of them and, pausing in the hall, raised the lamp at arm's length as if to light them up the stairs. Ethan paused also, affecting to fumble for the peg on which he hung his coat and cap. The doors of the two bedrooms faced each other across this narrow upper landing, and tonight it was peculiarly repugnant to him that Maddie should see him follow Zena. "I guess I won't come up yet a while," he said, turning as if to go back to the kitchen. Zena stopped short and looked at him.
For the land's sake, what are you going to do down here?
I've got the mill accounts to go over. She continued to stare at him, the flame of the unshaded lamp bringing out with microscopic cruelty the fretful lines of her face.
At this time of night, you'll catch your death. The fire's out long ago.
Without answering, he moved away toward the kitchen. As he did so, his glance crossed Maddie's, and he fancied that a fugitive warning gleamed through her lashes. The next moment, they sank to her flushed cheeks, and she began to mount the stairs ahead of Xena. That's so. It is powerful cold down here, Ethan assented, and with lowered head, he went up in his wife's wake and followed her across the threshold of their room. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that takes you to chapters 1 and 2. Don't move it.
I was going to make sure it's getting you.
Chapters 1 and 2. We are going to do, you guys are going to read 3 and 4, and I'm going to post an assignment that you'll be due next Sunday. I hope you guys are enjoying this as much as I am. Bye-bye.